Hey, good morning, everyone. It's currently 9 o'clock. We'll give it a few more minutes before we get started. Allow other participants to a little bit of time to join the meeting. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the State Water Resources Control Board's Drinking Water and Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program fee stakeholder meeting. This meeting is being held virtually through the Zoom and webcast platforms and also is being recorded. My name is David Ceccarelli, and I am the Fee and Revenue Branch Chief within the Division of Administrative Services here at the State Water Board. Today, we have many of our Fee and Revenue Branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that this meeting runs as smoothly as possible. If any time throughout this event you find that you're having technical difficulties, please email us at the email that's on the screen there, which is das-drinkingwaterfees@waterboards.ca.gov. From the Fee and Revenue Branch, and assisting me today is Cassandra White and also Tracy Lotz. And I want to welcome Tracy to the stakeholder process. Tracy was recently promoted to our drinking water and ELAP manager position. So welcome, Tracy.
Thank you.
Individuals attending through Zoom, please use the raise the hand function if you'd like to ask a question or provide a comment. If you're joining us through the webcast, you can also submit a comment or a question by emailing us. In the past, there's been delays in the broadcast through the webcast. Therefore, through the meeting, staff may pause so the broadcast can catch up to the listeners. Again, we thank you for joining us today virtually. We thank you for your patience as we've moved into this 100% virtual meeting space. We are doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective way. So let's just go over a few meeting guidelines. One, remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via email. If you do not have the handouts, don't worry, we'll be sharing the documents on the screen, and you can request a copy of documents after the meeting, or the handouts are posted on our Water Board's fee webpage. Again, remember, if you have any technical difficulties, please email us and my staff will be happy to help you. Please remember to mute yourself if you're not speaking. And remember, you can also submit comments and questions to the event by sending them to the email address. And then finally, for the meeting to run efficiently and to stay on track, we are requesting each participant who wants to ask a question to please ask one question at a time. I understand you may have a clarifying question to your original question, and that's acceptable. Once your question is fully answered, we're going to move on to the next participant's question, and you will be put back into the order of participants who are requesting to ask a question. In addition, if the discussion starts to move away from the intent of the meeting, which is, of course, discuss drinking water and ELAP fees, then I'm going to ask that the participant and I meet offline to coordinate these discussions further and involve appropriate staff as needed. So at this point, let's go ahead and review the agenda. So item number 2 there is basically a overview of fiscal year 22-23 Safe Drinking Water Act review. So the first portion of the meeting that we're going to be discussing drinking water, and then the second portion will be discussing ELAP. Item number 3 there is that we'll go over the Safe Drinking Water Account Fund condition, and then we'll discuss the budget cost drivers, and there's a couple of BCPs that we'll have some discussion about. And then for the drinking water program, we're going to discuss some potential drinking water fee adjustments. And then we'll move into the ELAP portion fees, which we'll talk about the fund condition, cost drivers, and then teeing off potential fee adjustments that we're looking at. And then we'll move into some open discussion and then next steps of the fee stakeholder process, which leads us to our next stakeholder meeting, which is scheduled for June 14th. So with that said, we'll go ahead and we'll move to the next item here. And before we get into these next 2 slides here, we reached out to our stakeholders in the fall, and not just for the drinking water and ELAP, but for water rights and for our water quality programs yesterday. And there was just some requests about wanting a little more breakdown of everything from our expenditures to our revenues, and then position counts and so forth. So we listened, and we're trying to provide the information as best as possible. I've kind of mentioned this in the past, that there was a span with Fiscal where we didn't have the reporting data where we were able to extract information that we'd be able to put on charts for documents for our stakeholder meetings. So we're starting to get the data from our accounting system, and we're starting getting to a position where we're able to provide more updated information. So with that said, I'm going to toss this to Cassandra, and Cassandra's going to kind of walk through the next couple slides here.
Good morning. So this first table, it is a snapshot of fiscal year 22-23 Safe Drinking Water Account expenditures broken out by state operations, pro rata and supplemental pension, and that's a statewide assessment that began around 3 years ago. And then it shows the total expenditures and then the total revenue for the fund. So for state operations, which I did want to note does include other state operations as well, was $36 million. Pro rata and supplemental pension was $2.3 million, for a total of $38.5 million for expenditures. And revenue collected for fiscal year 22-23 was $40 million. And if you go to the next slide.
And then Cassandra, real quick, back to that next slide though. You want to just highlight what you mentioned about other state operations, what's included in that?
Other state operations would be like Cal EPA would be probably the major one that's included in there.
Right. So we just wanted to just highlight that within the state operations, it wasn't just the water board state operations. Of course, we have a budget line item in the Safe Drinking Water account for costs associated with our head agency, Cal EPA. So there's charges there. So we've rolled those up into, of course, the state operations line item.
Thank you. Next slide. And then the second set of tables shows the authorized position for the Safe Drinking Water account by program activities. So you see the first table is the public water systems, and the second table is drinking water administration and miscellaneous activities. And as David mentioned, this was due to a stakeholder request, and the intent is that we will every March stakeholder meeting provide the previous closed fiscal year with an update. So for March 2025 stakeholder meeting, we will be sharing fiscal year 23-24 data. But back to you, David.
Correct. So yeah, part of the request was, just looking at the total expenditures, which the majority, of course, of state ops, is that kind of a painting a picture of how many positions are authorized and are charging to the program. And as as we get these numbers from the budget office and we're able to kind of flush them out, at this point, we were able to kind of break them out into these categories here. But again, wanted to just kind of paint the picture of the staffing level, and based on the kind of what how that falls within kind of the state operation number of expenditures. So next item. So I'll go ahead and take this here. This is a kind of a point in time of the fund condition statement, and I wanted to also mention that that the numbers that we're reflecting right now is based on the January governor's proposed budget. And I know I've mentioned this in the past, is that the first stakeholder meeting here in March, it's a little early in the process. Still a lot of moving pieces taking place. So again, kind of a point in time. A lot of the numbers are, as we start to look at 23-24 and 24-25, that of course they're budgeted numbers. They're and as our accounting office starts to close the labor months in fiscal year 2023-24, I anticipate in our June meeting that I'm able to kind of flush out and shore up the numbers and expenditure numbers for 23-24, which then starts to paint a better picture of where we're landing, and recognizing that normally that our expenditures are lower than what our budgeted number is, just based on some salary savings and some vacancies that may be occurring into the program. But looking at 22-23, again, where we landed at, our beginning balance was basically about $1 million. Our revenues came in about 40 million. And the total expenditures were 38.5 million. And this kind of represents, of course, where we landed at on that first chart that Cassandra was mentioning, which basically means that we had a surplus of about 1.5 million. So revenues exceeded expenditures by about 1.5 million. Which provided us an ending balance of about 2.5 million in the account, which is about a 6.7% reserve. So moving into 23-24, we're starting the prior year, excuse me, in the 23-24, starting the year with a beginning balance of about 2.5 million. We're projecting revenues to be about 42.5. Now, again, here's a budgeted number of about 44 million. And then based on that budgeted number, there is a structural deficit about 1.5 million, which would draw the fund down to roughly about $1 million, which is about a 2.2%. And so a little bit alarming because it does draw the fund down. Now, again, this is a budgeted number. Come in the next few months, we should be able to adjust the expenditure number based on reports. And if, we'll see, again, I'm pretty positive we'll see some savings there and be able to lower that, which then adjusts basically my revenues and expenditures, and, should see a little higher ending balance as we're moving forward. And so again, this is a point in time, and that's why I wanted to mention that's a little early in the process. But again, kind of looking at these numbers, the way they lay out now, moving forward, as you can see, if we weren't to do any fee increases in 24-25, you can see the fund would go into a negative. And so looking at our budget year for 24-25, we're definitely needing to generate roughly around $4 million more, roughly about 5 million more in revenue. And so and to get that, basically revenues of the 45 million and our expenditures of 45 million. That's what we're trying to line up there. It does definitely show a lower reserve, and that's something that I'm going to be monitoring, especially here as we move into the June meeting, to see if adjustments need to be made to adjust that reserve amount also. Again, it's a point in time early in the process, but I wanted to, we show this fund condition just to kind of show where we ended in 22-23, and then the projections as we're moving forward in the current year for 23-24, and then for 24-25. So I'm not hearing any questions or seeing any questions at this point. We could always come back if anyone wants to talk a little bit more about any of these slides, but we'll move to the next item here. And what we're looking at here are the budget cost drivers. And it basically represents our fee setting budget in 23-24 to where we ended into our start of our governor's January proposed budget for 24-25. So I'm going to toss this to Tracy, and I'll let Tracy go ahead and give an explanation here.
Hi, good morning. The first table shows the last fiscal year's 23-24 fee setting budget, which was about 42.9 million. And that's followed by the governor's January proposed fee setting budget for 24-25 at 45 million, which is a net difference of about 2.1 million or 4.9%. The second table shows what is driving the program costs. The first cost driver is state operations, with an increase of just over 1.7 million or 4%. This is primarily employee compensation, including salaries, healthcare, retirement. The next item are the BCPs. There are two this year, which Cassandra will explain in more detail after we run through the totals. But the first is the enforcement support for permanent and sustainable drinking water solutions. This BCP is 250,000, which is just over 0.5%. The second BCP is the Information Security and Privacy Staffing BCP. This BCP is charged to all water board funds. The SDWA portion is 46,000, which is 0.1%. Finally, the last cost driver is pro rata, which shows an increase of 99,000 or 0.2%. You may recall pro rata is an indirect cost incurred for services performed by the state's central service agencies, such as Department of Defense, Department of Finance, State Controller's Office, Human Resources, and Legislature. That cost of approximately 20 million is applied to all state agencies, including the Water Board and each of its programs. That concludes the cost driver detail supporting the overall SDWA increase of 2.1 million or 4.9%. Before we take any questions, I'll pass it back to Cassandra, who will provide more detail on those two BCPs.
Thank you, Tracy. So we'll go back to the first BCP is the enforcement support for permanent and sustainable drinking water solution. This BCP supports the Division of Drinking Water's efforts to implement solutions for communities lacking safe drinking water and enforce the Safe Drinking Water Act. The position would be dedicated to a dedicated attorney position within the Office of Enforcement to support the Division of Drinking Water's enforcement efforts. So the 250,000 is ongoing funding for one permanent PY. And the second BCP is the Information Security and Privacy Office staffing. This is to enhance Information Security Office staffing capabilities and establish a new privacy office. The new PYs will provide staffing needs in the areas of privacy, technical security, and information security compliance. The total amount of the BCP is $629,000 for 4 PYs. And the safe drinking water account portion is $46,000. And that is the conclusions of the BCPs. And just to note, the links are provided if you wanted to go back and refer to the Department of Finance to look at the complete BCP. And I will hand it back to David at this time.
Thank you, Cassandra. And I just want to point out right now, Darren Pohemus, the Deputy Director of Drinking Water, is on the call also. And Darren, I just want to ask you if you want to chime in anything or add anything additional for the specific BCP that's associated with the enforcement support.
Sure, I can briefly mention it's really the addition of one additional Office of Enforcement Attorney who we work with to do enforcement actions. We only have one position assigned to us now, and that position's greatly overtaxed, unfortunately, in our work associated with drinking water enforcement. So it's just the addition of another position.
Thank you, Darren. I'll pause here for a sec. Don't see any questions right now. Let me just, Cassandra, do we have any questions to the teams or excuse me, from
No.
emails coming in? Okay.
Not at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Well, then let's shift to the next item here. Actually, before we the handout, let's go back to the agenda because we have a couple of items for drinking water there. Okay, so next item here are some potential drinking water fee changes. We wanted to have a conversation referred to as kind of teeing these up because as we get into our June stakeholder meetings, we'll have a more formal proposal that we can present to the stakeholders and definitely have more detailed further discussions on this. And one has to do with the disadvantaged community certification, and then the other has to do with our group porter fees. I will pass it to Cassandra at this point for her to kind of start the conversation, and then as the conversation continues, I'll kind of chime in on a couple of things.
Okay, thank you. So the disadvantaged community certification, the current process was that the individual would certify whether or not they were disadvantaged community. And that process has changed to where now program will make the certification. And as a result of that, we anticipate that the number of disadvantaged communities will change and then ultimately will affect the fee schedule and the revenue that comes in based on an increase to the disadvantaged community certification. And go ahead.
So on that, what we're having to do is, of course, we're working with program staff for the Division of Drinking Water. We're really having to kind of recalibrate the revenue stream or the fees, basically, right? Because as through the certification process, someone who may be paying it under our current structure now may be deemed under the disadvantaged community would see a lower fee. And of course, it's revenue neutral. So we're going to have to recalibrate and figure out how we assess that fee to the entire water system community. And so we're in the process of doing the calculations to figure out what that looks like, and then what that represents in a dollar amount. And again, as part of the process, we'll bring this back in June and be able to make a determination, of course, what that impact is to the overall fee payers. And so we'll continue that process. Again, we wanted to kind of bring it up right now to start the discussion. As the June meeting comes on about, we'll have further detail on what this is going to look like. And we have a question. I'm not sure what the first name is. Is it
It's Judy.
Oh, Judy. I'm sorry. Good morning, Judy.
Good morning. I just had a real quick question when it comes to, determining the fees for the upcoming year. I'm kind of curious if there has been any review of other state programs and how their fee structure looks, as well as, the participation of laboratories and what they're paying to other agencies outside of the state of California.
So I guess your question has to do with, I mean, more with the ELAP program. We'll get
Oh, it
to,
does.
yeah, we'll get to it here in a moment. We do evaluate, all programs. We do our best to kind of look at kind of what their cost of compliance and what what their fees look like. On our situation is that we're authorized to set a fee schedule to cover our costs, per the Budget Act. We do try to evaluate and make a determination of what what a lab or what a business, their other costs, and again we refer to as kind of cost of compliance, but we do try to separate the two because we do realize that we are authorized again to set a fee and to again to cover our costs within our our budgetary authority. Maybe we can again explore your question a little further as we get back down into the ELAP program.
Yep, my apologies for jumping ahead. I wasn't aware, that where exactly we were in the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
So I think we'll move, if there's no questions again on the disadvantaged community certification, we'll move to the group quarters.
Okay, and group quarters is a category that was added to the drinking water fee structure some time ago. But due to some system issues, it was never implemented. And so the group quarters, there's a category that will be added to the fee structure this year. But also before we do that, we're working on that process, but also we will be sending out supplemental billing invoices to those fee payers that identify or should be identified as a group quarter, a supplemental invoice based on the correct current fee structure. And we will be sending some information out to those identified fee payers prior to receiving an invoice, and then also with the invoice having further discussion on that. I don't know if program staff, I believe Gabriella is online, if you would like to discuss group quarters, explain it a little more.
And that,
I can try to explain it just a little bit. So
Okay.
there was a group quarters issue associated with the way we bill based on the count of connections, and there was supposed to be a multiplication to figure out the actual size of the population served in the group quarters. So for instance, some institutions like a big college or something could have one master meter, so technically one connection, and therefore appear as if they're a single entity rather than serving thousands of people. So we're just working to make sure that we spotted this error and how we're doing it. We've, in essence, underbilled some entities because of the calculation, and we're looking to possibly modify the language associated with the regulation so it's a little clearer that it's truly trying to be population to match what would be a similar fee for a community of the same size. Hopefully that's helpful.
yes, thank you, Darren. And as Cassandra said, we've identified that there have been some invoices that are kind of erroneous that weren't billed correctly, and we're in the process of sending out some notifications and doing some supplemental billings for the invoices that were sent out for 23-24. So here soon that there'll be some notifications and explanations, and definitely there'll be contact information on there. So if you have any questions, please contact our staff. And then as Darren stated, as we move into our board process of setting structures for fees in September. Staff is looking at putting together an option that we'd be taking to the board for the consideration adoption. Basically, just kind of cleaning up and making a little more user friendly on the language for the fee structure for the group quarters. So definitely more to come. We'll talk a little more about it in our June meeting, and be able to highlight it at that meeting as we move through the process.
Yeah, we do apologize for the oversight, and we probably should mention, David, while we're adjusting current year bills, we're not looking to go back in time for the erroneous billing in prior years.
Correct. That's a good point. Exactly. So that concludes the drinking water portion of the meeting. I'm not seeing any questions. Again, more than happy to come back if anyone has any questions. And then, you know, if after the meeting, you want to talk about any of the charts that we propose or, you know, explain today, we'd be more than happy to have those discussions. So let's go ahead and move to item 6, which is the ELAP fund condition. And I'm gonna ask Cassandra, do we have the handout for the stakeholder meeting in fiscal year 22-23, which showed the budget act for 22-23?
Yes.
Can we pull that up? Oh, perfect. Is that, yeah. So I just wanted, before we start these conversations, before we get into the conversation with the fund condition statement here, I wanted to highlight this chart here. And the reason is because I wanted to show the enacted budget for 22-23. And so what you're seeing here is when we were coming into fiscal year 22-23 and we were looking at setting fees, here was the cost for 22-23 of $4.5 million. So that was our budgetary authority to support the ELAP program. And I kind of mentioned this before, there's, you know, 25 positions that charge to the Environmental Laboratory Improvement Fund. And so I just wanted to show this number because as we move into the fund condition, I kind of want everyone to understand that this is, at this point, this was the budgeted number, right? And then what we're about to show in 22-23 is the outcome and expenditures. And there were some actions taken that's gonna represent the number that we're about to display. So again, the budget enacted number for 22-23 was $4.5 million. So if we can now move back to the fund condition statement. Thank you. So looking at fiscal year 22-23, our prior year balance was $83,000, and we generated almost $4 million, like $3.9 million in revenue. And then when you come down to expenditures, our state water board expenditures were $2.5 million. And that was a result because we went to our board and the Division of Drinking Water and Darren made some decisions to charge several staff to another funding source, and then also hold some positions vacant. And as a result, that's going to provide us savings in the ELIF fund, and it helped us kind of improve the fund condition itself, because there was a lot of uncertainties at the time about fees and so forth. So and help minimize the fee increases in that year. And so as I mentioned before, the budget act though coming in was, you know, $4.5 million. And our expenditures again wound up the outcome based on those actions that the Division of Drinking Water took, basically reduced expenditures to $2.5 million. So as a result, the ending balance There was a positive in the surplus of $1 million with comparing revenues and expenditures, and which basically ending balance of 1 million in the fund, which basically provided a fund reserve of 37%. So moving into now our projections for 23-24, our beginning balance in ELIF is $1 million, which is the carryover from the ending balance of 22-23. The total revenue, we're targeting 4 million. That's kind of our projection right now. Although again, a little early in the fiscal year process with our accounting reports, but we'll continue to monitor that. But this is a budgeted number right now. This is the expenditures. This is the expenditure amount of 4.4 million. And so again, this is an expenditures. What I'll say is that now in 23-24, those positions that were charging other funding sources or held vacant are now all charged to ELIF. So all 25 positions have been directed to charge to the ELIF program. So there's no longer this kind of savings or, taking place by charging other funds or vacancies being held. So we're expected, again, that's a budget number, but the budget is almost 4.5 million. And then that represents a deficit about $440,000. Again, giving it's an ending balance of 650,000, which basically puts the fund reserve about 14%, 14.6%. And now just kind of highlighting kind of where we're at in 24-25. If we don't do anything, that of course the fund falls into the deficit, and basically looking at 24-25 at this point, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to of course match revenues with our expenditures. So we're looking to needing to generate roughly around $600,000 in revenue. And what that would do is, of course, align with our revenues with our expenditures. And so, how we get there, of course, staff is looking at, options of adjusting our fee structures, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But that's kind of where we land right now with the fund condition statement. I will pause here for a second, see if there's any questions.
No email questions.
Hey, good morning, Debbie.
Oh, oops, there we go. Good morning. Thanks, everybody. Hey, just a couple questions. So I realize that the current year is based on those positions being completely full. What is the amount of what's like the actual? Where are we really falling? That's one of the questions. I'll ask both since the one says in queue. And then the second one, just to think about it, is that 14%, it looks like with the reserve, you're looking for 6 million. Is there a reason why it's 6 million? Because normally I thought that's like is that about 10%, or is you still looking for like a 5% of overall reserve? I wasn't able to read that. So those are the two questions. Thanks.
So your second question, though, about the reserve, of course, this is kind of how it's playing out right now. What the goal, though, is to ensure that revenues and expenditures are matching, right? And looking at it right now, without any fee increase, of course, it's about the structural deficit is around $600,000. So that's kind of the first thing, and then we'll see how that plays out with what the reserve looks like. Right now, it's 14%. And I've mentioned this before, is in smaller funds, you definitely want to have a little higher reserve just to cover any economic uncertainties. $650,000 is not a lot. I know I mentioned this yesterday in the water quality and water rights stakeholder meetings, and I'll talk about this again. one of the main reasons is that of an economic uncertainty, at least in the budget process itself, is that what happens every year is that the enacted budget gets signed, and that could be for for $4.6 million, which is being proposed, which is at this point is expected. But with that said, is if there's any negotiations that take place, and one of the negotiations, what I mean by is if there's and this is outside of the water boards, but if there's staffing unions that are negotiation with the legislations, and it's approved after the Budget Act, then come in November, December timeframe, the Department of Finance does a process, and the numbering system is referred to as the 7A schedules, and they make adjustments to salaries. Then it basically means that 4.6 million in expenditure cost could say bump up to 5 million or so. I'm just going to use that as an example, but I don't resend out supplemental invoices or anything like that. I'm usually in the process where I use the reserve to help cover those costs. And so fortunately, over the last 10 plus years, I've been able to utilize the reserve if something like that happens. And so we'll monitor kind of where the reserve falls. Right now, I feel like it's in a good spot. Again, things could adjust based on how the expenditures fall out for 23-24. A lot of the way the reserve is set right now it is taking place of what's happened in 22-23, is because again, by doing the salary savings, as you can see, the reserve rose to 37%. And then, as you know, Debbie, there's some uncertainties with the revenues, right? Just kind of with the fluctuations of labs and so forth. So definitely, there's things that I need to kind of continue to monitor with the revenue streams and ensure that we have some type of reserve, because the worst thing I want to do is come back to the stakeholders and say, hey, we're in a negative, so I need to do an increase to get us back up to a positive balance, and then also potentially whatever increases are taking place in that year or budgetary adjustments. I'm sorry, your first question though, can you repeat that?
No problem. It's more of a staffing problem, so staffing question. So I know that that the cost that you're projecting includes what you're authorized to, not necessarily what's actually staffed to. And I was wondering what the differential is right now.
Well, I could just speak for the budget side of things. I mean, the ELAP program has 25 authorized positions, and those are costed out. And again, the cost to that is roughly for 24-25, almost $4.4 million. And so and I know that the like any of our programs, we try to keep them all fully filled, right? And so at the level 25, when a position becomes vacant, our organization, we jump on as fast as possible to try to refill those positions. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question, or if a program staff wants to jump in.
I was thinking maybe Darren or Katie might know.
Morning. Hi, Debbie. Just to make sure I'm understanding your question, you're wondering how many vacancies we have right now, correct? Okay. We have 2 vacancies, and we are filling those positions. They're from staff that left the program recently. So.
Okay, so you filled up, you fully filled, and then you went down, because I know last time that we talked that you were holding some vacancies.
We were holding vacancies before. That was intentional to keep the fees down. That was last 22-23 budget year. And then we were directed to fill those vacancies. So we started working on that. And in that time period, some of those have been filled and some more people have left. We had some turnover. So we're trying to fill the 2 vacancies that we have right now to be fully staffed.
Okay, because I'm going from the fall update that you also did before the State Water Board, and there were still vacancies then.
Yeah.
and that they weren't filled. Actually, I didn't even think that it had gone from there. And just it doesn't have to be answered now. I know that the audience is curious as to, what kind of duties are where they're being filled and how that's,
Sure.
playing into the overall program. Again, considering that it's shifting, it's different, and what was expected with the new regulations were happening. But we don't have to answer that now. I just
Well,
want
I can answer that quickly.
Okay.
We are, yes, so absolutely, we understand that all of the stakeholders want that information. And so what we're doing right now is a deep dive on all of our staffing, and all of our duties and a workload analysis that we are going to get together and then, give to the stakeholders who want to see that information. So, we've heard you, we're working on it, and, that should be relative. I would expect that to come out later this spring.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Is it Judy? You have your hand up?
Yeah, Judy. Hi, Judy. We can't hear.
You're muted, Judy, if there you go.
I found it. Got it. I guess back to my original question regarding the cost of the program. So I understand that there's some shortages in personnel, and the way the current program is being run is basically based off of how it's been run in the past. My question would be, for the future, since there has been a lot of changes to the program from the standpoint of allowing third-party auditors or third-party assessment and the like, my question would be, has the program been looked at from the standpoint of right sizing the program for the number of labs and the activities that are in it? And there's a reason why I ask is because, in the role that I'm in for the company that I work for, which is PACE, we have looked at a lot of the other agency programs. The state of New Jersey actually accredits more than 700 laboratories with less people and at less cost to the laboratories. And so my question would be, instead of continuing to just keep adding program fees to the laboratory community to close a gap, my question is that what we really ought to be doing here, or should we be taking a harder look at the services in the program in comparison to other programs, and maybe doing some benchmarking for against with programs that are as successful or more successful than the current program here?
Yeah, I think that's a valid question, Judy. So I'm going to just point back to that workload analysis that we're working on right now as kind of a first step in looking at some sort of trying to compare. But I think it is difficult to compare unless you're able to compare it across services, right? So we may not be running exactly the same kind of program that New Jersey runs. We have an enforcement unit. We don't have like technological solutions for our PTs. So a lot of things are manual. And that's just on the ELAP service side. We also kind of have to think about that other portion of our fees, right? Like, we are in California, and so we have notoriously a lot of regulation in our state. So what we pay to our state to support us may be drastically different than, New Jersey's program pays to the state of New Jersey to support them, and also to the water board to support our program as well. So that is a hole that I would not know where to begin to go down that rabbit hole. I'm not sure that would even really be a beneficial thing to look at, because we're not going to be able to change those things. But certainly on the program side, we're looking into that, in terms of what our staff are doing. And, that's the next step for us.
Right. And honestly, I mean, I'm not trying to question, the program, the way it is set up. I'm simply comparing it. And it's not just New Jersey. I've looked at least 10 other programs, and there are huge differences. And where this program is going puts a huge burden on the laboratories, which makes me wonder if the services that the laboratories are having to pay for with their fees are much, much more than what other states. To your point, not knowing exactly what's being paid for in other states versus what's being paid for here, I just have to wonder if, the fees that the laboratories are being charged aren't going to fund other things outside of what other states charge. And maybe that's the difference, which also would make me wonder why that would be as well. Because, from the standpoint of what benefits us, I don't know that I know that all of the services that we're funding benefit us. So that would be the other question. So I'm looking at this solely from this isn't a regulatory perspective. This is a business perspective and trying to understand the budgeting and what it's truly paying for. Because I know that when we figure out our own budgeting as a laboratory, we know what we're trying to pay for from the standpoint of data generation and those sorts of things. And that's the reason why I ask.
Yeah, I can absolutely appreciate that, Judy. It is a valid perspective to bring to a government program, but the reality is that like public administration and public budgeting is so very different from business budgeting, and the constraints that we have are there's not comparable constraints sometimes in the business world, and those are just frankly things that I don't have all the details on. I mean, Dave would know better. There's many, like Judy mentioned or Cassandra earlier, there are many oversight agencies that we pay to support. And that is just state infrastructure that we don't have any way to change. It would certainly be an interesting line of inquiry to look at. I don't have a better answer for that. I'm sorry. I don't know.
No, and honestly, I didn't expect you to have an answer today. It's just food for thought. It's a different perspective. I mean, from coming from the commercial side where we actually have to make our profit and those costs and the charges and the fees and everything has to balance out. We have to look at it from a different lens. And I don't see this as being different, but I also know that, the past history of government hasn't been run that way in any government regardless. So, anyway, just food for thought. And
I really appreciate that perspective. I think often there's things you can take from both sides and get a good outcome. So thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Thank you. We had an email question. This was from Allison McKenzie with Babcock Laboratories. And the question was, does 23-24 projected include the 30% increase in fees for 2024?
Yeah, so last year's fee increase.
Yes, and I was going to say it does include last year's fee increase, that amount. And it would be for 2024 only in the sense that that's the current fee. The fee structure is based on that 30% that was enacted last year. But it's not suggesting a 30% for fiscal year 24-25, if that's what you're asking. So just to clarify. I'll hand it back to you, David. I don't know if you heard the question. Last question, David.
I did not.
It was from Allison McKenzie, and she asked, does the 23-24 projected include the 30% increase in fees for 2024? And I just said, yes, the 23-24 does include the 30% increase we had last year, but it does not, in the sense, it's not saying that there will be a 30% increase for the budget year 24-25.
Right, correct. It's already been adopted, included into the revenue numbers. And I wanted to add one thing. I apologize, Judy. I was cut off there for a second. One thing we've noticed though, when we've talked to other states about their regulatory programs and fees, and it's not always specific to ELAP, but other programs, it's difficult to kind of look at our fees and their fees, is because some states get subsidies from their taxes or their general funds and things like that. So we'll see programs where we look at our fees and their fees may be lower, but when we start getting into discussions about, well, their overall budgets and how they're funded, they'll have some type of subsidies and that they're able to then, of course, minimize their fees or, um, uh, keep their fees maybe at a stagnant level where they're not increasing them on a kind of an annual basis. In our situation, of course, because we're totally fee funded and there's, no general fund or any other support that's supporting this program. It's always a little bit of a challenge, when we start having these discussions with other states and kind of looking at how they're funded. And so I just wanted to bring that up. I'm not always saying that that's always the case in all of our programs, but it also, we see it here though in California when we're even other state agencies and or at the local county levels or local municipalities where we start looking at other permitting programs and we find out that they're being subsidized and they have these smaller fees or fees that haven't been adjusted. And it's just because our organization pretty much is a fee-based organization. So it's challenging, of course, to kind of help answer the question about, your fees compared to another organization's fees and knowing that other organization may have other subsidies that are supporting that program.
I appreciate that additional context and that is helpful. And just to be fair, I'm mindful of those differences and not being able to compare, every little point from one agency to the next. But when you look at the differences, and there are some significant differences with New Jersey's 754 labs, they only have 16 staff in their program. And I did specifically ask if these programs were cost neutral and if they were subsidized. So being very mindful of the variables, I did try to kind of clarify as many of those as I could in this quest to understand these differences. And I just find that there's enough question between the programs that as a laboratory who pays fees from multiple locations in California, that at some point it's going to be cost prohibitive to do business in California and be supportive of the environment. I mean, it's just not going to make sense to do that. So so we're trying to look at it from the standpoint of, business justification. I mean, it's like anything else. There's a cost of doing business, but when the cost of doing business doesn't seem to be, we don't seem to have an impact on how it's, directed back at us, then it makes it very difficult to make future plans.
Understood. Thank you for the comment.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I think we can move to the next item. I'm not hearing any other questions, and Cassandra, no questions from the email list?
Correct.
Okay.
Hello again. Okay, to go through the cost drivers, the first table shows last year's fee setting budget at 4.65 million, followed by the governor's January proposed fee setting budget for 24-25 at 4.67 million. That is a net difference of 20,000 or 0.4%. The second table shows what's driving the program costs. The first cost driver is state operations with an increase of 73,000 or 1.6%. And the second cost driver is pro rata, which decreased 53,000 or 1.1%. That is the cost driver detail supporting the overall ELAP impact of 20,000 or 0.4%. And this concludes our look at the budget cost drivers for the ELAP. Are there any questions here on Zoom or email?
So thank you, Tracy. Just again, highlight the budgetary expenditures for the program aren't exceeding, high levels compared to last year. So they're staying pretty stagnant. And just kind of right now, what we're kind of looking at is basically just kind of cover that revenue shortfall and kind of how we can do that. We've talked about our fee structure. And you know, we talked about it kind of at the board meeting, and that we would continue to have these discussions. And I know earlier in the fiscal year, you know, there's already been, you know, kind of a breakout meeting discussions on the fee structure. And we're going to continue this discussion. And so I think we move to the next item. I think it's on the agenda, which leads us to kind of, you know, potential fee changes, right? And you know, you might have heard us before. You know, we were kind of, you know, we're kind of looking at, you know, can we make some adjustments to our current tier adjustment? And that's kind of one of the things on the table that, you know, staff is looking at, potentially looking at adding additional tiers kind of on the back end of the structure, which would basically mean that you know, the larger labs would have a larger burden of the cost, and so we're definitely looking at, you know, what that would look like. I know there's been some discussion about having a fee based on samples, and you know, it's something, of course, I think program staff is looking at. I don't think we're completely there yet, but it is good to, you know, if providing some that type of information to show what it could look like and what the impacts of going from a sample to where we are now with the with the current tier. And so what our goal is that of course, you know, we had the original meeting, and you know, we'll be working, if we're gonna have another just breakout meeting regarding a potential fee change prior to the June meeting. And you know, we'll kind of work internally to figure that out, and if needed, we'll set that up. If not, definitely for our June meeting, that we'll have some options that we're going to present, and have some discussion about it, definitely feedback. One thing, of course, I ask from the community is if you know, if you think that there's a structure or some proposal that, you know, that you could come up with and have a discussion about, you know, we'd be more happy and love to hear the insight and kind of the understanding behind some of the rationales of proposals. So we're definitely interested in that also. So again, you know, we recognize that the structure needs to be evaluated, and you know, we're continuing to look at it. And you know, like I said, we're looking at a couple of potential options and adjustments to the current FOA tiers, and that we're planning on presenting those here soon, whether it's again within just its own meeting with the group, and specifically just for fees, or if we have it at our next June stakeholder meeting. And then I just, Kate, while you're on the call, I don't know if there's anything you want to add regarding just kind of looking at potential changes.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but I will kind of just remind everybody where we've been, which is that we went to the board, and the board, you know, we told them, hey, you know, here's what's happening with our fee structure. And they directed us to explore ideas to kind of shift the fee burden towards the larger laboratories that are doing the most work in our state. Because we have really a handful of laboratories who are doing like a bulk of the work. And so we originally were planning to go down the route of doing a volume charge. And so we drafted some regulatory language, sent that out, and we had a resounding and very cohesive response from the laboratory community that said, this is a huge amount of work for us, and it would have a huge cost because we don't already have this information about how much work we're doing. So we kind of went back to the drawing board, and now we're exploring some options, working with our current fee structure within kind of the tiered structure to get at volume that would maybe be way less work or and time intensive for laboratories and for ELAP. So that's where we're at right now. We're working on some models. I think we'll be taking that to our fees working group to get some initial feedback on that. And like you said, David, before June, we will absolutely be talking about it in this meeting in June, but before the June meeting, we will be looking to get some feedback from our working group.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hey, David, I have an email question. This is from Sue Mossberg, and it says, what technology improvements to automate ELAP are planned? And then she gave a little more context for the question. She said the question is in light of the prior question asked about comparing with other programs and the response that California has a heavily manual process.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are working towards procuring a new database accreditation system. We have not gotten there yet. I mean, there's quite a few challenges with funding that we've experienced there. So right now we have an old system that was built in like the late 80s or early 90s. All of our proficiency testing review is done manually, line by line. So that is a huge work task for our staff. And that's one of the major systems we're looking at getting in, is something that can handle all of that proficiency testing volume. But we are not there yet. We're in, very early stages. I wouldn't imagine we get anything into our program within the next couple of years.
Thank you, Kate.
I'll just add, sorry, this is Darren on that. This has been a high priority for us. It's a bit difficult to do in a time when certainly we're struggling with the fee component. There'll be an expectation that we pay for it somehow directly from that. And we have tried several times and will continue to try to make the case for why it would be important to figure out a way to definitely improve our technology there. We are very worried about it, and we do recognize the need to improve it dramatically, and that's topmost in our efforts, but we have not been allowed to pursue that to this point.
Darren.
Thank you, Darren. So I'm not seeing any other questions at this point. Kind of moves us into our open discussion. I know we've kind of had kind of a lot of our meetings with the questions are kind of through the whole open discussion process. And again, I'll just take a moment here if anyone wants to raise their hand, ask any other additional
David,
questions.
we do have a couple email questions,
Okay.
or one more, I should say.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Shasmitha Reddy is asking, when estimating revenues for this year, has the fees for amendment been accounted for? There will be a large number coming in due to MUR updates to FOAs.
So I see Kate, shaking her head. So yes, we've estimated that revenue into our projections. So we'll move into again next steps here. So our next stakeholder meeting is scheduled for June 14th. That's a Friday, and it's basically same time frame as this one at 9 o'clock. What we'll of course be presenting at that time, of course, budget wise, is that the May revised budget will come out, and we'll see kind of what the budgetary expenditures look like for both of these two programs, along with if there are any additional proposals, or if there are subtraction from proposals that are in the January proposal. So we'll go through that, and we'll have those discussions. as mentioned earlier, that the links of the two BCPs for the drinking water program, if you were to click on those, it will take you to the Department of Finance and website, and the narratives are there on those budget change proposals. And then, as Kate mentioned, as we start to flush out the fee structures for ELAP, we're definitely going to ask for feedback from the ELAP fee group that we've set up and have kind of further discussions. So there's no date set, but most likely there'll be a meeting prior to our next June meeting. And then, of course, at the June stakeholder meeting, there'll be further discussions on the staff's proposals or the group's fee structure that we're looking at as we move on into that process. Of course, we're driving to taking fee structures to our board in September. I don't have the exact date, but it's the second board meeting in September, where staff will present items, fee structure items to the board for their consideration and adoption. And then, as I mentioned earlier, at any time you have any questions regarding the information that was provided today, please reach out to myself or Cassandra or Tracy. And of course, we could always work with the program staff. Also, if it's more program related, to continue conversations and get you a response. So again, I appreciate everyone's time. I want to thank the fee staff behind the scenes for setting up the meeting. I also want to thank the Division of Drinking Water for their assistance in this meeting. And everyone have a great weekend. And we'll be talking soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.